the first article that came up was from a couple of days ago, and I wasn't aware that they'd actually arrested somebody in relation to the Nordstream underwater blast and destruction of the pipeline, and that it was in Poland. Now, the article here is talking about the conclusion of the court case, where the Polish judge has refused to extradite a Ukrainian citizen to Germany. So Germany wanted him. He was detained in Poland last month on a European arrest warrant. The judge argued that if Ukraine was responsible for the attack, then it was a just act. That has far more reaching impact than I think most people are aware. That this judge has basically arbitrarily decided that violent action or destruction of infrastructure outside of the territory that is currently being fought over is not only militarily okay or permitted, that such destruction is permitted and can be done by agents, agents as in individuals or groups that are not necessarily defined belligerents, and they're not necessarily uniformed or clearly defined combatants, but that it is a just act. Now, coming out of Poland, this is a bit weird, and I don't know if there's going to be a follow-up from that. And so the accusation, or the suspect, was that he planted explosives below the Baltic Sea on the pipelines on Nord Stream. The blame from the blasts initially focused on Moscow until signs of Ukrainian involvement began to emerge. Only if you were a blind reporter. Those details were immediately aware. There was... if you were ignorant of what was going on, fair enough, you might not have known, but the media was like, Russia's fault. But it failed the smell test. There was so many holes in that argument. It's just like, why are you selling us this? But yeah, Ukraine has repeatedly denied any role. The Polish Prime Minister said the ruling was right. Case closed. Oh, Poland's getting themselves set up for things. Okay, long and passionate speech. So obviously, he's made it political. Considering only said he was considering only the request to send the suspect to Germany, not the substance of the case itself. But he was clear that the context of the war in Ukraine was critical. So, come back to his statement of, if Ukraine was responsible, it was just. I was only considering the request to send him to Germany, not the substance of the case itself, but the context was critical. Well, those two statements don't go together. Russia's invasion is a bloody and genocidal attack. Well, gee, I wonder which way he goes. Ukraine had the legal right to defend itself. Well, based on his own arguments, this judge is now a legitimate target because he's stopped prosecution of the destruction of the pipeline. He just said that the destruction of the pipeline was a just act. So, therefore, anybody who's involved around it being targeted is also a just act. If Ukraine and its special forces organised an armed mission to destroy enemy pipelines, which the court does not prejudge, you did, then these actions were not unlawful. They are. Because the whole reason there are ICC warrants out for Russian military leaders at the moment is because of attacks on infrastructure in Ukraine. That's it. For targeting infrastructure. So this Polish judge has basically self-inserted himself and said, it's not a war crime if we do it. It's just collateral damage. On the contrary, they were justified, rational, and just. Yeah, this guy's going to see his statements reappear. If the ICC cases ever proceed, they're going to be quoted right back at him. He's undermining the legitimacy of the warrants issued on behalf of the ICC. Well, I think people who think critically about it would have argued that the ICC warrants were unjust to begin with. But to then have these statements come out, well, it just validates that viewpoint that the ICC warrants are inadmissible, that they've been politicised weapon, and that the ICC is not standing up for the morals or the goals it was designed for. So, anyway, I think this Polish judge has shot himself and many other people in the foot. Deprived the Russians of billions of euros. What could be seen as terrorism or sabotage in peacetime was different in a time of war. Well, down here is not a conflict zone. The map's over the top. The conflict zone is down here, not over here. So Germany had in fact halted use of the two Nordstream pipelines. Poland had always been a vote. Okay. Now there's secondary concerns, which is Poland was suffering an economic loss because of the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, the whole Nord Stream pipelines through the Baltic. Poland has been a vocal critic for making Berlin too dependent on Moscow, whatever. The route through the Baltic deprived Poland of transit fees for the gas. Ukraine and the US were also long-standing, Ukraine. So there used to be, or there were, the pipelines out of Russia used to run through Eastern Europe, through Poland and everyone else to Germany. And so these nations that had the pipelines running through them would get a transit fee. Ukraine would also tap off the gas as well. And part of the justification, that wasn't in the casus belli, but people believed there to be part of the justification that Putin was using to invade Ukraine, was that Ukraine weren't paying their bills. They were effectively in default on their payment for the gas that they kept taking out of the pipelines. And so Russia was part of the reason they built the Nord Stream, was to avoid that sort of situation. It's part of the reason why people say that there was the civil war in Syria, why the US and other nations were so supportive of certain groups, was because there was going to be a new pipeline coming out of the Middle East that was going to go through Syria and Turkey, or was going to go through Turkey. They were trying to prevent the use of pipelines that they didn't have a control over or didn't have access to. And so whilst it might have nominally been about the freedom of the Syrian people from Bashar al-Assad's rule, there were other motives at play, such as the distribution of natural resources and who gets to have transit rights for them. So the judge also questioned whether Germany had jurisdiction to even bring the case, as explosions were in international waters. Well, not quite. These EEZs, yeah, I mean, maybe outside the 12-mile limit, but on pipelines with a majority of Russian state ownership. Okay, the Ukrainian would also get compensation from the Polish state for having been arrested. I'm happy it was a very hard 3 weeks. Really? You're not helping your case here. The Ukrainian guy's wife said, "For me as Ukrainian, it was very important to hear that he understands us. The family plan to stay in Poland where they have lived since February 2022. Earlier, she described her husband's arrest at their home outside Warsaw and said he denied any involvement in sabotage. he is a deep sea diver, but it is a hobby and said he had no military role. I can understand why the guy was arrested now. And no, he has a business in Poland installing air conditioners. Every little snippet of information just makes it seem more and more like he's, yeah. His wife could not tell the BBC exactly where her husband was when 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines were blown up, because she said no one had asked her. He's not the only suspect on Germany's list. There's another Ukrainian man. He's in jail in Italy at the moment, and is currently appealing to... Whilst he was ruled that he should be extradited to Germany, the verdict was annulled by the top appeals court, and the case has been returned to start again. Asked about the decision, Germany's foreign minister said, "Respected the ruling, not the job of the government to interfere with the courts." Whilst, okay, they've gone ahead and done it, I've got a feeling this Muppet and the one back here, the judge, are setting a bad precedent. Really. It's going to give legitimacy to the actions outside of the conflict zone, and attempts to abrogate international war crimes conventions and things like that. It's just the arguments put forward in the article I don't think are very good, and that it legitimizes, it sets that precedent that actions against elements outside of the conflict zone are a just act. Well, okay, let's take that as okay. Let's take it at face value that that's the case. So the conflict zone down here, that means Russia can destroy the military hardware that the NATO forces, various NATO countries, are supplying to Ukraine, but they can reach out and destroy them in the countries that they're originating from. So rather than waiting for them to arrive at railheads or bases in Ukraine, they can destroy them in situ in the countries they're coming from. Because according to this Polish judge, what is terrorism or sabotage in peacetime is different in a time of war, and that these sort of actions are just acts. Yeah, see? That's the problem. You might agree ideologically with something or not, but you've got to think about the longer term, broader effects of the decisions you've made.